I'm Jackie Clement of the Fair Media Council, and this month we have a great presentation for you, very timely, very important, and rapidly changing. So we want you really to pay close attention to what's happening right now because the topic is AI and your reputation. And presenting for this month, we've got a great expert on reputation, Richard Torrenzano. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Torrenzano Group. If you know anything about reputation, you know he's been in the game for a long time, so he knows what he's talking about. So Rich, first up, thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Jackie.
And we can hear you, so we're all good there.
Okay.
Before you actually begin, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for these workshops that we do. It's a monthly series. We want to thank Henry Schein, Northwell Health, and St. Joseph's University. So everything we do has an educational component to it, and to educate businesses on the importance of reputation and how AI poses both challenges and threats to their reputation is a very important topic right now. So with that, Rich, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Originally, this presentation was designed for continuing education credits for lawyers and accountants. And that sounds really boring and technical, and it was. Luckily, we've changed it, spiced it up, and focused on corporations and organizations. As we dive into 2024, this year, the year of artificial intelligence, AI will add to our personal and professional lives. Conversely, today's world is disruptive and unstable. Let me show you how AI will crank up the chaos. So brace yourself, it's really going to get interesting. As we begin, let me mention the copyright notice on the last page that we take very seriously. This morning, I'd like to go through a number of things with you as an agenda. We're going to talk about our digital world. We're going to show you the three categories of AI, cyber, and self-inflicted attacks, and talk about the types in each category. And some real-life examples, actually. The SEC has gotten into the mix a little bit, and we're going to talk about that briefly. And is there a secret sauce? What do you need to do? What are the pain points? And what can you do when an attack hits? And then I'll tell you just a little bit about us. America's greatest investor and media star, Warren Buffett, commented on reputation. This is what he said probably 20 years ago. And with AI thundering at us at warp speed, he seemed, as usual, to know what he's talking about and be spot on. Many C-suite executives find themselves in uncharted waters when it comes to facing live AI or cyber attacks. Regrettably, a significant number of corporate cultures, business leaders, and advisors are simply not organized to operate at digital warp speed. The complexity and intensity of such attacks will catch many off guard. Unfortunately, management will need to divert attention from directing the business to navigating these unforeseen attacks and challenges. It is crucial for leaders to understand these digital attacks and challenges have changed, and they need to adapt swiftly to the new consequences of crisis turbocharged by AI. So are you prepared? Well, in the grand scheme of AI challenges, as Joey Cipriani on the TV sitcom Friends would say, how you doing? The answer is likely not so sure. AI and cyber attacks will hit business and brands very hard. It's not a soft concern, as institutional investors have set non-financial company performance at 35% of equity value. Most corporate boards and most managements we present to believe reputation is vital in helping them achieve objectives. Before we dive into AI and cyber attacks, let's review a self-inflicted crisis. This is a photo of Barbra Streisand's home on the cliffs in Malibu, California. It is magnificent. I was there once for a charity fundraiser. This funny girl was not thrilled when a drone-wielding photographer took photos of her home, this picture, and posted it on the internet. Even big names get caught up in their own mess. In 2003, Streisand's lawyers took an old school approach, filing a $10 million lawsuit in Santa Monica Supreme Court against the photographer who was documenting erosion along the California coast. The problem unfolded as Streisand and her lawyers did not grasp the sheer reach of media, even back then, years before AI. When the news of the lawsuit hit, her home photo spread across hundreds of websites, not unlike the visual of blowing on a dandelion. In the end, the lawsuit had to be dropped, and the judge ordered Streisand to pay $200,000 in legal fees to the photographer. They even named an internet term after her blunder. It's called the Streisand effect. It relates to an attempt to censor or hide or otherwise draw attention away from something, but in the end get far more attention than desired, and that's pretty much what she got. A few years ago, a client, a friend of mine, called to say he was trashed on a website, and he was really incensed. He's a good guy, and he's a terrific CEO. I looked at the website he referred to, and it was disparaging. But I also researched it and found only a handful of people visited the website in the last few years, not unlike the website that posted the Streisand photo. Over dinner with the CEO, the following night actually, we shared a bottle of fine Italian wine. I counseled him on his strategy: do nothing. During the second bottle of wine, he grasped the concept. Fast forward to today, about 100 people over the last few years have visited the site in the last couple of years. Two takeaways here, particularly in the AI era. Sometimes it is important to refrain from action, but it must be a decisive decision, not born out of procrastination. Lawyers play a role, but those lacking internet experience should avoid conventional actions with potential repercussions that they may not be aware of. So let's now look at our AI and digital world today. Most of us on this call understand the difference between AI and social media, but in several other presentations, the audience did not. So here's a quick, simple explanation of AI as well as social media, how they work individually and how they work in collaboration with each other. This shows a visual journey of social media leading to us today. Lots of milestones in that left-hand corner. From 1978, bulletin board launching to Threads being launched last year. But did social media really begin in 1978? I'm not so sure. Let's look at some slides. Here's a simple Facebook posting. Here is a Yelp review about restaurant service and its cuisine. We've seen lots of postings like this before. Actually, these kinds of postings are a throwback to ancient Roman times. These are stone signs placed and inscribed by people about venues and cuisine served at taverns in that era. They were posted outside the taverns. While they may not have the global reach of social media today, they sure hit their target. So did social media really start in the late 1970s? It's the classic case. The more things change, the more things remain the same. Let's look at what happens every 60 seconds on the internet. There are some highlights here on the wheel. There's 2.4 million Google searches. There's 18 million texts. There's 6.3 million Zoom minutes every 60 seconds. Every 60 seconds. So the internet doesn't just tick, it roars nonstop with data and interaction every single minute. AI is accelerating a new era of digital combat marketing. It's not a matter of if, but when your organization is attacked. Let me repeat that. It's not a matter of if, but when your organization is attacked. Actually, today, major corporations face hundreds of cyber and digital attacks every minute, probing for vulnerabilities. The who and where remain somewhat unknown, so being prepared is paramount. One of my favorite actors is Michael Caine, who, by the way, just announced his retirement. He played Alfred the Joker in Batman: The Dark Knight, and this is what he said, which to a great extent reflects a lot of what's happening in cyberspace and, unfortunately, in our world today. Now, leaks have profound effects on organizations, and I want to take you through some of this. Let's pivot to discussing from speed and dive into the magnitude of things. Along the left side of this chart, in little black squares, shows the size and timeline of the WikiLeaks and the Swiss leaks, all of which are in the public domain. Now, if you look to the center, this vast sea of red squares represents the magnitude of the Panama paper leaks, comprising hundreds of gigabytes of unreleased data. So just so everyone understands the scale, each square is a gigabyte of data, and each gigabyte equals 1 billion bytes of data. For me, that's pretty much overwhelming. Observe there is a blue arrow directing to a black box. In essence, the expansive red area remains undisclosed to the public. It's akin to a gigantic data explosion, device just sitting out there. What information does it contain? Whose names are included? It's not really known yet. For context, the confidential documents that were released in the black box originated from a Panamanian law firm and leaked through a German newspaper. This law firm aided affluent people and corporations globally to establish offshore shell companies for asset concealment and tax evasion. The documents released so far expose a network of more than 214,000 tax havens spanning some 200 nations. Post the leak, numerous ministers, business executives, and celebrities faced arrest in 10 countries, including Australia, Belgium, Denmark, Germany, and Italy, to recover hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenues. There's not much in our world that's permanent, but here is an exception. Everything posted on the internet is posted and retrievable forever. Just to be clear, anything posted on the internet is there forever, even if it's taken down. Tools like the Wayback Machine let you time travel through the digital archives of the World Wide Web to show how websites looked in the past. So before you post anything anywhere, double check your facts and make sure you understand the implications of what you are about to share. Because once it's posted on the internet, there's no removing it. It can always be retrieved. A few years ago, I was invited to speak at a Korn Ferry CEO conference during the International Financial Futures Industry Conference. What I said then stands today, although a few years ago, there were still a few disbelievers in the group. Now, let's get into AI attacks. There are three basic categories of AI attacks. In each, there are several types, and we'll highlight them and show you some real-life examples. The first category is AI attacks, and there are three types, as I mentioned. Next, please. First, there are deep fakes, which create individual or multimedia content in audio, photos, or videos through impersonation. They can be used individually or in collaboration with each other. They spread false information, harm reputations, and use manipulated evidence for frauds and theft. This is probably the biggest problem we're going to have in the 2024 election, from congressional races all the way through the presidency. Additionally, you may have seen just last week, this started to pop up in some Harlem elections. Next slide, please. There's lots of examples here. One of my favorites is a deep fake fabricated product review. They appear real, some promote, and most devalue products or services. And we're starting to see them frequently on the internet. Another interesting one is malware and hacking tools, which independently scan and identify vulnerabilities and weaknesses in cybersecurity system defenses. Once a vulnerability is identified, bots launch multiple attacks, leading to data breaches or service interruptions. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. Some are familiar with phishing emails from illegitimate sources that appear authentic. These messages trick customers or employees into revealing sensitive data or information or clicking on harmful links. The third type is social engineering. AI generates highly personalized, convincing messages that lure people to divulge data, compromise systems, reveal sensitive information, or allow malware downloads. Next slide, please. Category B are cyber attacks. And again, we're going to show you three types of cyber attacks here. These are crafted and personalized messages to trick into sharing data, again, compromising systems or downloading malware. The first type is external. External attacks are traced to criminal syndicates, state actors, overseas competitors who aim to destroy or steal money, data, or intellectual property. Disruption, warnings of attacks, ransomware, extortion, retaliation, or denial of service. There are two acronyms or abbreviations at the bottom that I want you to be familiar with. DDoS is an abbreviation for distributed denial of service. These are cyber crimes which flood servers with internet traffic to block legitimate users from accessing sites and connecting to their online paid or unpaid services. DOS is denial of service, which occurs when legitimate users are unable to access the system, devices, or other network resources due to the action of a malicious cyber troll blocking emails, websites, online accounts, and so forth. One of the widely known breaches was the Equifax data breach, which occurred in May and July in 2017. Private records of 147 million Americans, along with 15 million British citizens and approximately 19,000 Canadians, were compromised. This is one of the largest cyber crimes of identity theft in history. In a settlement with the Federal Trade Commission, Equinox offered affected users settlement funds and free credit monitoring. And this set the standard for consumer assistance when attacks have gone forward. In February 2020, the US government indicted members of the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Party of China for the hack, stealing sensitive data as part of the massive heist that also included trade secrets. Reputation attacks target companies' operations, individual management leaders or board members on issues as well. We've seen more and more of this today. These assaults pose a substantial threat to the overall integrity and functionality of the targeted organization. Here are some examples. Dissident shareholder attacks merit 4 or 5 separate presentations. But let's focus on this one that gained widespread attention in 2017 and why this would be very important today. A group led by Bill Ackerman and two director nominees from his hedge fund, Pershing Square Capital Management, fell short of securing 25% support from ADP shareholders at their annual meeting. The vote resulted in the re-election of all 10 ADP directors by significant margins. Ackerman's calls for change in a hostile proxy campaign spanned about 3 months, garnered widespread attention in both traditional and social media. Today, however, AI amplifies the immediacy and intensity of such attacks, especially through something called AI segment analysis, known as SA. SA, which really talks about sentiment, interprets numbers, words, and sentiments to trigger instant and robust buying and selling, something we referred to 15, 20 years ago as program trading, now turbocharged by AI. For more insights on AI's impact on company annual meetings, earnings, and these types of attacks, I published 2 byline articles in Fortune in the last 2 weeks, and you can look at those for a lot more detail. Beware of internal dangers. These are deliberate or unintentional leaks from current or disgruntled or former employees seeking revenge for employment issues, engaging in commercial espionage or financial gain. Our firm consistently observes companies underestimating the impact of internal threats. Keep this in mind when law enforcement investigates cybercrime. Their initial focus is internal. A question just popped up here. With so much reputation pressure on leaders, would it be better off staying out of the spotlight? No. The pressure on leaders, leaders have to have a visual presence, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. So I'll refer you back to the point when we're talking about that a little later. Next slide, please. In April 2019, a former Apple engineer faced charges of corporate espionage, accused of stealing crucial trade secrets linked to Apple's autonomous vehicle project before planning to join a Chinese electric car startup. The engineer allegedly downloaded confidential files and shared them with his new employer. Apple responded by terminating this employment and collaborating with law enforcement in the ensuing investigation. In July of that same year, the engineer was apprehended at the airport while attempting to board a flight to China. The case underscores concerns regarding intellectual property theft and corporate espionage. In 2022, a significant leak occurred at the Supreme Court of the United States, which we refer to as SCOTUS, exposing sensitive details of a draft opinion overturning abortion rights. The breach attributed to a security lapse lacked clear details on the motive. SCOTUS initiated an investigation, and despite conducting 126 formal interviews and producing a comprehensive 23-page report after an 8-month investigation, the court failed to identify the leaker. Personally, I find that dubious. The investigation findings underscore vulnerabilities in the court's information security, emphasizing the critical need for urgent reforms to fortify the confidentiality of their judicial proceedings. Self-inflicted crisis result from negative employee actions or poorly considered social media posts. These situations demand decisive leadership to resolve organization conflicts swiftly. Swiftly is a very important word. The root causes often involve a failure or promptly recognize and address systemic risks. Some of these we're going to show you how AI today would compound them beyond expectations. Next slide, please. Everyone was aware of the United Airlines Flight 3411 when a passenger, a doctor, was involuntarily dragged off the plane. Passengers accused United Airlines employees of escalating the situation, and it marked the second time in a month UA faced criticism of passenger treatment. UA's legal response lacked any social media awareness. Company statements contradicted posted videos by passengers, and their statement had to be changed 3 times in 4 days, showing a lack of basic English writing skills as well as any empathy. The video gained rapid traction, sharing 87,000 times and viewed by almost 7 million people in less than 24 hours. It also became a global trend topic, reaching #1 on Weibo, attracting 480 million views in the Chinese and Vietnamese markets. The Boeing 2020 737 MAX involved fatal crashes in Indonesia and Ethiopia, claiming 346 lives, and now the 737 is back in the news with other problems. At that time, crashes were attributed to a flaw in the aircraft's automatic flight control system. Boeing faced criticism for transparency and inadequate communications to a broad variety of stakeholders amid allegations of rushing to the certification process. The company's internal response was criticized, downplaying the problems, contributing to a significant breakdown in trust and confidence among the public and many stakeholders. Ultimately, Boeing had to pay more than $2.5 billion in fines and compensation, admitting responsibility for the crisis, and now facing legal consequences, management changes, sales disruptions, and much more. Today, this would be even more enhanced because of AI, not only in financial markets, but in terms of the media. This is an interesting list. It's a list of Wall Street is littered with companies with self-inflicted crisis. Now these companies will be dealing with AI's ludicrous velocity. The SEC is kind of getting into the mix, and the chairman said this at a regulatory conference, a financial industry conference in May 23. And following this statement, no surprise, the SEC enabled a number of cybersecurity rules for public companies in July of last year. This is kind of a quick list of those rules involving strategy, governance, and other incidents, the time of disclosure, and a number of other things. But I would recommend that you check the full list of regulations regarding your company. Next slide, please. So what can you do when these types of attacks hit your company? Is there a secret sauce, particularly with AI? Well, the answer is yes and no. But you need to be doing many things well all at the same time. One of the things that I tell CEOs and management and boards all the time is that there are no silver bullets. And when you have an attack or someone asks you to stop it, you have to explain that it cannot be turned off as you flick off a light switch. One of the most important perspectives for management is that 99% of company employees and managers stand inside the building and look out. Leaders in a crisis must stand outside the building and look in to see the same view as most, not all, but most of their stakeholders. Most of the skills we learned as managers don't work in a crisis. In many cases, you have to do the opposite of what managers were trained to do. One of the important trending concepts today is H to H. There's no more B to C or B to B per se. Everything is human to human. everyone sees and hears almost everything digitally, immediately, and simultaneously. So while we still do marketing in this area, you have to understand that all of your stakeholders do see more than what you're sending just to them. So what's the overall objective when you want to protect reputation, limit damage, and regain trust? There's one overall goal, and that's to restore stakeholder trust and your reputation. That's done through having a strategy and tabletop exercises. Far more coordination today is necessary, and relationship building with and rehearsals with your IT department, your legal and other operational departments in your company. You have to really calm investor jitters that they're not ready to sell the stock later in the afternoon or at the opening bell. And you have to maintain focus on rattled employees, and they will be rattled, to concentrate on managing the business and the recovery, not worrying about the crisis. There'll be a team in place to do just that. Different constituencies, different industries have different concerns. Is there a rehearsed plan to address various constituencies, employees, investors, regulated media, so forth? Who do you want to influence, and in what priority order? Most managers don't like to hear bad news, but you have to tell them that. And are you really monitoring and listening, a key word, listening, to what your constituents, your stakeholders saying? What is your call to action? What do you want them to do? Until you write down all the people you affect, you may not realize the range and scope of them. Let's just look at this slide. If you're a public company or a private company, you probably have investors. There's all levels of employees. There's clients or customers, regulators, business partners, vendors, and suppliers who are very important in production for manufacturing companies. There's media of all sorts today. There's community government leaders at all levels. There's special interest groups who want to do you harm. And there's industry analysts and competitors. Competitors are also can be your best friend or your worst enemy. This is one of the most important concepts we will discuss today, the 2-hour digital day. Today, the instantaneous digital world demonstrates that time is not on your side. Consequently, we must think quite differently about time than we did just a few years ago. In my game-changing, best-selling book, Digital Assassination, Protecting Your Reputation, Brand, or Business Against Online Attacks, we established a standard digital response process, as well as a response time for digital harm at that time of 8 hours. Several years since the book has been published, today that concept is even more important as the speed and magnitude of attacks or leaks is turbocharged by AI. We are now facing a 2-hour digital day. In today's instant mobile environment, when a company is attacked or a sensitive document is leaked, you have 1 or 2 hours for an initial response. Delays in response and conflicting statements, like we saw in United Airlines, written in legalese or gibberish or acronyms, result in a fiasco. I wrote about this in Fortune magazine in a bylined article in 2022, in December of 2022. And as I mentioned before, unfortunately, in many corporate cultures, business leaders and their advisors are simply not organized to operate at digital warp speed. How many people can remember 4 or 5 things? We send out a lot of messages to clients and various stakeholders, but unless I write them down, I can't remember them. And most people can't remember things that you send out to them. Let's go to the next. Yeah, thank you. This is the Bill of Rights, which is part of our Constitution. We've studied this since elementary school. If I were in a room and we're virtual today, I would ask people how many people could name me the Bill of Rights, and I would ask them to raise their hand. Most people, not even lawyers, cannot. Here's a simple list of the Bill of Rights in simple English. We struggle to remember one of the most fundamental things of our freedom. How then can you expect stakeholders to remember multiple messages that they are mostly hearing for the first time? This goes back to the question of the gentleman before, the lady before, about being visible. Face the facts without admitting fault. Many will remember the crisis of the Exxon Valdez, or the supertanker, bound for Long Beach, California. The Valdez was a disaster in 1989, and when the tanker ran aground in Alaska's Prince William Sound, Exxon CEO Lawrence Rawls acted on legal advice and did not personally visit the site. When we're trained in military or in police and other things, you always run to the problem. You run to the fire, the gunfire in those cases. He should have traveled to the scene and talked with everyone, saying that they were working with all the local and federal officials to manage the terrible problem. He did not, and Exxon paid for that dearly. Exxon at that time, 30 plus years ago, invested tens of billions of dollars to clean up the effort and got never credit for it. Today, 35 years later, that enduring image of the oil-soaked duck in the person's hand still appears on CNN. You have to really understand sentiment, and you have to think about it as crisis evolves over time. Keep tuned into the shifts of public opinions and reactions to you or your company, and be prepared to adapt and respond accordingly. There's been all kinds of songs and sitcoms written about friends, but you have to have friends, and you have to make friends in all areas in your constituent and customer groups when it's not essential. So when you have a problem, they're there to help you and stand by you. Finally, don't over or underreact. It's very important to answer, as you address stakeholders in a crisis, 3 key questions. What information does your audience need? Not what information do you want to provide them. Let me repeat that. What information do different constituent audience needs? What should you communicate to various constituencies? And what action, if any, do you want your stakeholders to take? Let me leave you with a couple of thoughts here. First, AI will attack at ludicrous velocity and accelerate crisis circumstances with investors, customers, employees, regulators, journalists, and social media on a scale like you've never seen in the months ahead. Time is not on your side. We talked about the 2-hour digital day. And most importantly, you have to have systems that are listening to what's going on out there, and you have to pivot as the crisis evolves. Let me just take a minute and tell you about our firm, who we are and what we do. We like to, when we're asked to say, well, what do you do? We help organizations take control of how they're perceived. We like that so much we trademark it. Many organizations take, minutes, 30, 40 minutes to explain who they are. We do it in 3 seconds. If you'd like to connect with us, you can do so on LinkedIn or some of the other platforms. I remind everyone, as I said before, about our copyright. And at this point, I'll be happy to answer, if I can, any questions that you may have, including my opinion of who won the Super Bowl on Sunday. First question up is, let me just do this so people can see me. The first question up is, any idea how big of an issue self-inflicted crisis are, does it boil down to bad leadership? Well, that's always part of the problem. It boils down to an employee doing something that's not correct. United Airlines employees did not follow procedures. Boeing people did not follow procedures. You can always go back to a particular situation and determine what was not done properly. Is that bad leadership? Well, it's bad oversight, and leadership has a responsibility for oversight. Do these skills come from media training, or is it something else? Media training is only part of it. Media training helps you in presentations or discussing things with people, but you really have to have a sense of the business, a real understanding of your industry, and a real understanding of what's going on in the world and how things function. Many communications people have no understanding of how a newsroom functions, how they assign projects or stories, and who's involved in those things. So it's really, media training is a very, very small part of solving the problem.
Okay. Thank you, Rich. I think that's all audience questions. I actually have one as you were talking. And obviously this is just off the cuff, so I hope you don't mind me springing this on you. But there's been a lot of criticism basically about institutions as a whole and a lack of trust in institutions. Part of me wants to ask you, one, do you see that turning around anytime soon? But also, I'm thinking specifically about the 3 college presidents and their performance before Congress. I'm wondering what your thoughts on that are.
The first part of your question, is trust going to change? No, I think it's going to get worse. And I think it's going to get worse because of AI to some extent. I mentioned the deep fakes and the other things we're going to start to begin to see that is going to affect us. And I think it's going to weed away with any trust that's there. So I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. In terms of the 3 college presidents, I think there's 2 issues there. There's the plagiarism issue of one college president and some other people in her administration. And then there's the way they testified before Congress. Someone asked a question before about media trading. Those people did not anticipate the questions they were going to get. Now, whether they would have answered them the same way or differently, I don't know, but they didn't anticipate. They were not ready for those questions, and they answered them very poorly. I think, aside from perhaps some of the crises we talked about, that is probably one of the 2 or 3 worst crises last year. The crisis of trust has now infiltrated our universities and institutions beyond repair. I think the other thing is that I think what you're seeing is a rise up on all sides, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, is a rise up of people pushing back on what's going on in the world. And I think we're going to see more of this. I think we're in a very unstable situation right now. And I think we're going to see more distrust of all institutions. We've seen all of our institutions come under scrutiny. Our religious institutions, our sports institutions, our political institutions, our financial and business institutions. I showed you that list of all the self-inflicted crises that business institutions put onto themselves. And to go back to that person's question, part of that has to do with leadership, not understanding what to do with various constituencies when you're facing a crisis. It is usually not hide. You have to be visible, goes back to another question, and you have to be credible, and you have to tell people what's going on, how it's going to affect them, and what you're doing about it. That's exactly what the CEO of Exxon did not do.
Okay. One of the institutions that maybe we forgot to mention is the news media. What free advice do you have for turning around their reputations and building trust?
That is a monumental problem. And I think I lived in England for a number of years, and most of the news media in England falls on one side of the aisle or the other. And I think that's what we've seen in American media now. I don't see on either side a lot of credibility in terms of their coverage. Wall Street Journal, a couple of other media probably have more credibility than most in their coverage, in their news coverage. But the media is in a crisis, and slogans do not, and advertising does not get you out of the crisis. Actions do. Let me go back to another example of a major crisis last year, and I wrote about this twice in Fortune last year, is Bud Light. Bud Light is trying to advertise themselves out of a crisis. It's not going to happen. They're taking no actions on either side to shore up who they are and what they do. By pouring double the amount of advertising, by going on the Super Bowl this weekend, they are not going to advertise themselves out of a crisis. Advertising has a purpose, and its purpose is to help sell products or services. It does not change people's minds. And you can go to Valencia and Wall Street firms and a whole bunch of firms. Just a few weeks ago, and I wrote about this as well, the business community in San Francisco got together to advertise how terrific San Francisco is. Well, anyone who knows about San Francisco or has been to San Francisco in the last months, it is a disaster. It's a disaster of crime. Hundreds of stores have closed in the downtown area. Businesses are leaving California, let alone San Francisco. You can't advertise a wonderful picture when the reality is something 180 degrees. So advertising does not work. It's actions that are going to work, whether it be the media or corporations or religious organizations or sports or whatever. Actions show people you're doing the right thing. Advertising does not.
Do you think a smaller organization has an advantage over the larger organizations in this regard?
Smaller organizations sometimes can be more nimble, but small organizations don't have the depth of knowledge sometimes internally of what they need to do. I think that you have to be prepared for these kinds of issues that are coming at us in AI, whether you're a small or large organizations, and you have to have the right people on speed dial when you're hit. And that includes lawyers, firms like ours, IT officials, all sorts of people who have experience in this area, not who are going to play in it because they're being asked to play in it.
Yeah, it sounds to me like the IT folks who used to be the backroom people, with the big server and in areas no one went to in the company, they're starting to take more of a leadership role, no?
Well, they should. And if you're a communications person or you're a C-suite person, you need to develop relationships with these people. They can give you the technical understanding of what's going on, but they have no idea of the real world. They have no idea of shareholders. They have no idea about media. They have no idea about customers. So while they can go in and mechanically fix what's taking place, they can't deal with all of the various stakeholders that the company has to deal with, including employees. Employees need to be reassured of what's going on and what the company is doing. From a credibility point of view, investors need to be reassured so they're not selling the stock and the stock doesn't go down 20, 30, 40%. 2 weeks ago, I don't know if it was last week, the week before, talked about credibility, going back to your point, Jackie. The CEO of PayPal was on CNBC being interviewed. And he said at that time something along the line that we're going to change the world when you'll see our announcement in earnings. Well, the sentiment about his comments, the way he said it, that was so unprepared and so preposterous, is that his stock went down about 20, 30%, 35% in a matter of minutes. AI generated sentiment analysis. I talked about that in the presentation. So CEO words need to be prepared and thought out. CEO and leadership words need to be looked at of how they're being received. One of the things that we're all good at is sending out messages. But we're not as good as understanding that's why I talked about listening before. We're not as good as understanding about changes that are taking place, what's being received, what are various constituent perspectives. If I'm an investor, I have a very different perspective than a customer versus an employee versus others. So you've really got to address, you really have to know who you're addressing, what you're saying, what their needs are, what information do they need, not what information do you want to present to them. Two very different things.